So we look forward to getting some great answers, we know, from Professor Dalton here.
Well, you'll get answers. I'm not sure if they'll be great.
I'm sure they'll be just great. Thank you. So I guess, can we just jump right into it?
I think we can. I just wanted to let everyone know that I've started recording. So please try to keep your cameras and your mics off. Otherwise, you will end up on our website.
Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit of a brief bio about yourself, kind of let the viewers in on your degrees and certifications and education paths. So yeah, we'd love to hear that.
Okay. So as you're going to find out from my accent, I'm not from around here. I'm from the UK originally. I'm from Wales, so I speak Welsh a little bit. I came here to Alberta 17 years ago for a 6-month position, and that was after I'd finished my first postdoc position in the UK. So I'd already got my undergraduate honours degree in electronic engineering, my master's degree in biomedical technologies, and my PhD in biomedical technologies as well by that point. I'm currently assistant professor at the University of Calgary in electrical and computer engineering, and oddly enough, biomedical engineering as well. And a lot of my research is to do with kind of miniaturized microsystems, and I'm also the director of the University of Calgary's cleanroom microfabrication facility, which makes stuff for researchers all across campus and also for some local companies and stuff. So I've got a lot of different things that I do. And my research is, at the moment, kind of this concept of lab-on-a-chip, which is miniaturizing what you find in a kind of diagnostics lab and trying to make it all smaller, faster, cheaper, portable, all the things that I suspect your generation is very, very much a case of everything's portable these days. But one of my students was telling me he couldn't imagine a time before the internet. And I was like going, well, I can, because I lived it. And so miniaturizing everything is kind of commonplace now, but it's actually very difficult to do. So I do that. And I also do what's known as brain-machine interfaces, using miniaturized sensors that go into the brain to look at electrical activity for things like epilepsy. And I've got a spin-out company with one of my PhD students based on that. So yeah, there's a lot of things I get involved with. It's quite wide-ranging.
Wow, that sounds really amazing. It definitely seems like you're making a difference. Would you say that it's super competitive field right now, or is it more of a niche field that you're kind of trying to overtake?
Well, with Elon Musk having his own company in brain-machine interfaces, it's very competitive. Facebook also has done some work in basically brainwaves to text. It's very, very limited what they've done, but they are looking at that as a way of doing it. And we're finding a lot more out about how the brain works. It's got, like, 10 billion neurons in it. It's bigger than any kind of chip that we've ever made. It's the most power efficient integrated circuit on the planet. And we don't really know how it works on an electrical level. So there's a lot of things to find out. And there's a lot of people doing this work. As you can probably imagine, the stuff that gets a lot of the attention is kind of prosthetics. That's very easy to have a news article about saying, hey, we've got a chip in somebody's head and they lost their arm in an accident and now they can control some artificial robotic hand. There's a lot of work on that side of things been done up at the U of A by Vivian Mishwara's group. And then obviously across the world, there's many, many people in this area. And in the miniaturized side of the lab-on-a-chip, what's in the lab, that's just a huge field in many, many places. So any of you who have seen, CSI, when they do these DNA tests and things using this concept called PCR, that's been miniaturized using these kind of processes, and so it makes it faster and things like that. So it's a massive, massive field, and there's always a niche that you can then work in.
So we got a question in. Is this something that you were initially prompted to do, or was it just a result of seeing the importance of portability?
That's an interesting one, because it's very hard sometimes to plan where you're going to go with research. You think you know where you're going to go, For the last 10 years, I've gone down a kind of a side avenue of research that I wasn't expecting to do because I thought something would be a good idea. And 10 years later, some of my students are still looking at it. So sometimes you don't know exactly where you're going, but on a broader stroke, yes, I was interested in miniaturization. You know, I liked lots of things, like, you know, sci-fi books and shows when I was a kid, and, you know, the whole things like, you know, a tricorder from Star Trek and stuff like that. How do you make this? How do you get these things to work? What happens when you make things small? If you make them too small, they don't work as you'd expect them. And they work in new and interesting ways. So you can have a broad idea of where you want to go. So brain-machine interfaces, I actually got involved in that kind of by accident about 13 years ago when I was talking to a researcher in medicine who was basically buying off-the-shelf commercial devices to help his research, and he couldn't do what he wanted to do because they weren't kind of what he needed. And I said, well, I can just make those for you. And then, you know, 10, 13 years later, we've gone a long way into that area. But that was because I was doing the miniaturization of chips and things at the time. So yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah. So I guess putting COVID aside, what would a regular day, regular week of work look for you?
Well, with no COVID, there'll be a lot more time actually talking with my students. With COVID, it's online and it's just not the same. You can't brainstorm the same way in front of a whiteboard and bounce ideas off each other. Would normally have group meetings with all my students, both the undergraduate summer students, the thesis-based undergraduate students, my master's and PhD graduate students, and my postdoctoral fellows. And we'd all be in a room and you'd be all talking about the different aspects of the various projects, and that you really spark off a lot of ideas that way. And Zoom is good, but it's not good enough for that. You get on the board and you start drawing things. And that's one of the biggest underrated things that isn't kind of, I guess, articulated much, is how much you need to kind of network and talk to people and bounce your ideas. Things don't happen in isolation. You happen through teams and talking, and that's why conferences, academic conferences, are so kind of vital to knowing where to go with your research, see what other people are doing, get new ideas. So, you know, the research meeting would be a smaller version of that within our local group. So after research meetings, during the summer, I would be doing more kind of, more of my research. I would be more in the lab and writing grants to get money to fund the research that I want to do, which is a huge part of what a professor has to do. And then obviously during the semesters, I will be teaching, and that's then a big time sink. I also, one of the things you have to do as an academic is you have to do what is known as service, and that's being on committees around, you know, when a student applies to come into a program, they have to be evaluated for a program. And so as I'm in the Biomedical Engineering graduate program, I might have to then review applicants and rank them by certain criteria. I think earlier this year I ranked 70 odd different applications for funding. I was one of many people going through about 1,000 applications that applied across the university for funding. And so we all kind of got a bit or a section that we had to do. And, you know, if you think about it, you know, 70 odd applications, if you spend a minimum of half an hour on that, that's an entire week. You know? So your time is taken up by a lot of these things, the bureaucracy and the paperwork, just to get things done. It's not glamorous, that side of things, but the students generally get the fun in the labs.
No, absolutely. And I think this is probably like a good transition kind of to push us back into high school. You talked about all your amazing achievements and your vast amount of education. So when we're going back to high school, did you know what you wanted to do? Did you like all the subjects? And if you did, how did you really navigate what to gravitate towards when it came to university?
I didn't, is the short answer. When I was in school, I knew I liked certain things. I loved, as I said, kind of sci-fi, gadgets and things. I used to take things apart quite often at home, and I got a nickname of Professor Messer at the time. I wasn't so good at putting things back together, but I was interested in how things worked. So that's then kind of guided where I went within the UK system from what was known as the O levels to the A levels, which is the higher level of education at the end of high school before you can go to university, and you need A levels if you want to get to university. So that kind of guided me to go into doing more technology-based topics. So I did physics, electronics, and math, even though I was actually also very good at history and English. And so don't think you can break the two up. You have to be very good at writing to be good at technology as well. So that kind of helped me, but I wasn't really thinking about going to university at the time. Nobody in my family had been to university, and the university had in the UK is kind of elitism kind of thing, so it wasn't the most natural thing to do. But where I grew up in North Wales, it's not the best employment opportunities. I think I could phrase it that way. And the UK is massively crowded, right? It's a third the size of Alberta, and it has 78 million people. So jobs are hard to get as well. So, you know, I was thinking, no, you know, if I do well in my A levels, maybe I'll go to university. But I hadn't gone into my A levels thinking that's definitely my career path. And it came about because I realized that I needed, from my A levels, I understood more about how electronics worked. But then it's like, I didn't, you know, I kept going, well, why? Why does that do that? And that's a lot of the time the answer was, well, you'll find out at the undergraduate level, you know.
Yeah,
so,
for sure. So you enjoying English and history and all the sciences, do you think that you being so well-rounded is what makes you a good researcher?
Well, of course, I like to think I'm a good researcher. Well, other people actually use the metrics to determine that. But I think having good all-round knowledge of things in general. So history gives you perspective, what has worked, what hasn't worked. I mean, if you look at all the COVID research that's been done, I'm not sure if you're aware that the U of C had the very active kind of COVID research multidisciplinary groups. And one of the projects was kind of based around the old-fashioned iron lung that was used to treat people with respiratory diseases in the Victorian age. And people made, you know, a plastic rain barrel and covered it with plastic and sealed it. And so the knowledge of history of, you know, knowing that some things have been tried before, and we might then be able to apply new engineering techniques, is very useful. And then also knowing the context of where your potential technology could go for, in terms of, one of the things I teach is a graduate course on micro and nanotechnology, and I talk to the students there about, you know, their research, and I say, you've got to be careful with how you describe, say, nanotechnology, because, you know, 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago, there was a big issue around genetically modified foods. And a lot of that was miscommunication, misinformation, and a little bit of hysteria in the media. But that's really damaged a lot of the research in genetic modified foods, which could have a lot of help for people in arid conditions or third world countries where they have issues growing crops. But it got damaged because of this media thing. So I tell the students, if they're doing nanotechnology and they're working with things that are going to be injected in the body, or myself with brain-machine interfaces, you have to be careful how you talk about it, what the historical issues could be around it. You know, a lot of people go with the brain-machine interfaces, well, you're doing electroshock therapy, you know, and all the bad imagery that brings along, you know, Frankenstein and stuff like that. So yeah, having a wider understanding of where your work fits, the context, is always good.
For sure. So do you have advice for students who don't necessarily know what fields they want to go into, and they kind of like all of them, or they just don't really have one specific one that they can go into that field?
Try as much as you can of things. Always try and be doing something that's of interest to you, because then you'll actually pay attention to it. If you're picking something because, oh, it sounds cool and I don't really know much about it, but, you know, I think, you know, it's all over the media, I'll get involved with that. You might then find yourself doing, or, you know, getting into the details and finding that it's really, really difficult and you're not actually enjoying it. And if you don't have that connection, you don't enjoy it, then it becomes a chore, it becomes drudgery, it becomes something you don't want to get up in the morning to do. So follow the things that interest you. And if you're not sure quite, you know, where that is, because when I was in high school, I just kind of gadgets in general. Try looking at different opportunities so you can find these things out about yourself. I had a master's student recently in her defense at the end of her master's, and she got asked by one of the examiners what she'd learned. And she said, I've learned I don't like doing research. Right? And so she wasn't going to go back and do a PhD, and she was done. And she was going to go and go into the corporate world. And so it's not for everybody, but you need to kind of work out how you're going to find that out for yourself. So for me, it was doing lots of different things. And one of the great things kind of about Calgary and Canada is the concept of volunteerism. It's not so big in the UK, or it wasn't in my generation. And going to things like the Calgary Youth Science Fair, volunteering at TeleSpark, or doing things like this is a very good way of finding out what people get up to, whether you might like it. I mean, there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of reading stuff, right? So absorbing information, thinking about it, distilling it, coming up with ideas, right? If you hate reading, especially technical reading, because academic papers can be very dull, then this might not be what you want to do. But if you go around reading technology manuals to make the best circuit for making some gadget, then yeah, this could be what you want to do. So, I mean, with the advent of 3D printers and maker spaces and all sorts of kind of like these hackathon things that be happening or in different places, go to these, volunteer, get involved, and you'll find out which bits you liked and then work around from there.
Okay, so
answer,
on that topic of figuring things you like, what ended up making you choose the research path as opposed to the corporate path? And can you just describe what both of those scenarios look like and who you think would be best fitted for both paths?
I always thought after my degree I would end up in some kind of company in the UK. However, while I was doing my undergraduate, just to pay the bills, I was also working in a shop every weekend and every vacation for several years. So actually, by the time I finished my degree, I was exhausted. And I had relatives in Australia who said, come visit. So I decided to take a year and a bit off, and I went to visit them. And I traveled around Asia as well and things. So it gave me a different perspective on things. One thing I didn't have access to at the time, but a lot of students like yourselves will have to, is internships and things like that. That can give you a good indication of whether you like a corporate environment, but that wasn't available for myself at the time. So when I came back and the UK job situation wasn't particularly good, and I was looking around, I was applying for jobs. Actually, a professor that I had worked with called David Martin Taylor, when I was an undergraduate, I did a thesis with him for my final year. And I went back and, this is the importance of networking. I kept in touch. And I told him, I'm back from my travels, I'm looking for jobs, and he just said, oh, well, I've got a master's fully funded. Do you want to do it? So I wasn't looking for it. I didn't apply for it, as in apply for multiple masters around the country or anything. I got in touch with somebody. So networking is huge. And from there, from the master's from that, then when I was finishing that, I also was looking for jobs then. And the reason I did the master's was because I enjoyed the research I'd done at an undergraduate. And then after the master's, I'd done pretty well with it. I got quite a few publications from it. And I've been looking for jobs. Actually had 2 job offers from 2 companies in the UK, but then I also got offered a PhD position. And I'd so enjoyed the research in the master's that I did the PhD instead. So it wasn't as much money, but that's the reason I'm here now, because of the opportunities. And the reason I'm here now is when I was doing my postdoc in the UK after my PhD, one of the guys, again, the prof I'd done my master's with, David Martin Taylor, he bumped into somebody he knew that was now in Canada who was looking for somebody, and he recommended me. And I got a phone call. I wasn't even looking for the job. And I got a phone call saying, do you want to come to Canada for 6 months? 17 years ago. So I was looking at corporate jobs, but opportunities came up that then aligned with like, that sounds good. I mean, I didn't really know much about Calgary when I came here. I looked it up and thought, there's some mountains there. I like mountains. I'll go there for 6 months. That was part of my decision-making process. It wasn't technically, oh, that's a good move in my career. So you've got to weigh all the different things in your life, family, and if you want to travel, where do you want to go? What will allow you to travel? And all that sort of stuff. There's many things outside of just, are you going somewhere for a career? And as a lot of people are finding at the moment, sadly, careers that they may have in the past had quite some security with it through COVID, now a lot of companies are shedding jobs. So I would recommend, don't become fixated on a career path to the end, to the exclusion of all else. Think about the skills that you will need in any kind of career. So multidisciplinary thought, inquiring mind, ability to present ideas and things like that. Those kinds of things that you can take with you to any job, right? And they're not job specific. Stuff like
Absolutely. But if we narrow down on your career, do you expect these fields to grow, like brain-machine interfaces, biomed, like micro devices, or like what is the future job outlook?
Okay, brain-machine interfaces. I've been in it for the last 10, 15 years, and the last 2-3 years, it's really become outside of the topic of science fiction, it's become very more popular, probably because of Elon Musk and Neuralink, but also because of the advances that have been done in prosthetics. And this is all down to the miniaturization. So my actual background is kind of more microfabrication in a general sense. And so, and I teach like CMOS integrated circuits and stuff like that. So all of kind of technology that we rely on for our entire society is based around miniaturization to some extent. And the two fields I mentioned, BCI, brain-computer interfaces, it's just going to get bigger and bigger. People are realizing that essentially you can treat things like addiction and depression with it, not just things like Parkinson's and epilepsy. And there's a lot of things happening in the research space, which even 10 years ago probably sounded like science fiction. And that's due to advances in material science, biocompatibility, miniaturization. A big part of that is also due to AI. There's a massive component of AI involved with brain-machine interfaces to understand the massive amounts of data that's been generated. So BCI is a big, broad field. You can make robotics for prosthetics, so you can be making the microelectrodes that goes in somebody's head. You can be doing scanning and looking at imagery work through MRI. It's massive, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's just getting bigger and bigger. In fact, AI is one of the biggest growing fields to look at in general, and it applies to many other things, not just brain-computer interfaces. For things like miniaturized lab-on-a-chip, everybody just wants to go, well, a lot of people would like to go to, say, somewhere like the pharmacists in London Drugs and get a test and not have to go to a hospital lab or to a diagnostics lab that you have to nowadays. And even so, beyond that, if you can buy something off the shelf that you take home that will give you your blood glucose level if you're diabetic, or look at the Apple Watch and all the other smartwatches out there that are doing all these diagnostics for your heart rate and working out whether you've got arrhythmia and different things. This concept of wearables and lab-on-a-chip and miniaturization, it's all blurring, right? The software behind it, you need to write the user interfaces, you need to have the data management, you need to have the wireless data transfer. It's all coming together, and research is not as siloed as a lot of places through the kind of advertising courses and things that you might think. It's not just physics and electronics and maths and chemistry. It's all of it mixed up, and you'll have different people on your team. Like I've got one of my guys is a laser physicist, and then some of my other guys more microfabrication, and somebody else is a biomed, and then somebody else is, some of the papers I've got in at the moment from my team, I'm in electronics. One of my students is in mechanical engineering, another is in chemical and petroleum engineering, another is in biomedical engineering, but we're all working on the same project, but we all have different expertises on it.
Okay. So I guess you talked about how you are in charge of looking through grants and choosing which students get to do research, as well as you said you work with a lot of students like undergrad, master's, postdoc. So
Mm.
what skills and what specifically do you look for when choosing students to work with, as well as choosing projects to give grants to? So is there a specific quality or traits?
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's a good one. I'm probably going to sound like a heretic here, but a GPA of 4 is nice, but that won't technically or get you into my lab. I look at the skills around what you know. Just knowing stuff and being good at exams and getting good ratings in various scores in tests and standardized tests and all that sort of stuff is one thing. Obviously, you need to meet certain minimum standards. So, I think the BME program here is a minimum GPA of 3.6 or something like that. But once you've kind of met those minimum requirements, it's more about attitude and skills. And the skills, I mean, are more not technical skills. Your ability to present information, your ability to digest information, your ability to listen to other people's opinions and apply it to yourself and go, oh, I was doing this, but then I saw that person over there give a presentation and they were doing something else. And I can use that for what I'm doing. So adaptability is a big one. So when I look at a CV or a resume that comes in, obviously I make sure that it meets the minimum requirements of the program. And obviously, if I need someone with an electrical engineering background, then I'll take obviously all of those people with an electrical engineering background. But after that, I'll be looking at things like hobbies, things you've done volunteer-wise. If you just do, say, lots of hobbies like reading, chess, and things like that, then you're more going to be into the kind of data and analysis side of things. But if you're doing more kind of team sports, more things like organizing this kind of an event, then you're probably going to be better in a team environment. And you could be then, you'd integrate better into my team. And I've got a really good kind of quote from Bob Thirsk, the Canadian astronaut who used to be the U of C's chancellor. I happened to be on the University Senate and I worked with him for several years. And he has a great piece of advice, and it's probably common across kind of corporate culture. You can have the world's premier, best physicist on your team. And if they can't communicate their ideas to the rest of the team, they're useless. Right? And the team has to understand what they're doing, and they have to understand what the team is doing. So you maybe want the person who, if you were ranking these people, like this is this is a Nobel physicist and he's fantastic, and this guy's like 5 steps down, but he can talk, he can present, he's clear, he can articulate his ideas. He's better for your team because he will understand what you're trying to do and tell you either if you're going wrong, where you're going right, or give proper input to the rest of the team. So things with team dynamics are actually quite useful to look at. And then problem-solving things. Have you been involved with hackathon events, or I keep using hackathon events, but there's other kind of things like Calgary Youth Science Fair again. Have you done something like that where you've gone out there and presented stuff and presented your ideas, had some feedback? It's not an easy thing to do. One of my current undergraduate summer students last year, she really, really didn't like public speaking, but she knew she had to do it. So she did, and we helped her, the rest of the team helped her. We all gave her practice sessions, and she ended up presenting at a graduate conference, she's an undergraduate of mine, to 150 people, including profs from all over Western Canada, and she did really well. So that's another thing you can look at, is what do people go beyond their kind of comfort zone in their activities? If you just kind of stay steady, then research probably isn't a good place. And I've had experience with this with some students who, research isn't for them. It's too vague and ill-defined, right? So then that may be an idea then that you're more inclined towards corporate culture, where you've got set things by your manager and deadlines and tasks and things like that.
Okay. So I guess kind of continuing on with that,
Mhm.
how does your role in the lab differ as an undergrad student, as master's student, all the way up to being like a professor? So how does the leadership, the amount of work you do, how does that change as you kind of progress along that?
Okay, so an undergraduate summer student, it's a small, as in only 4-month defined project. So in my overarching 5-year grant, for instance, I would have the grant broken out into my big thing that I'm going to finish at the end of 5 years. Then I broke it out by what happens year by year, and then year by year, what kind of projects are going to be done by a master's, by a PhD, and then by undergraduates, either on a thesis-based project, so something like a 1 semester or 2 semester project, or through a 4-month summer studentship and things like that. So the undergraduate program will be a very defined goal. So it's a bit more directed, but there's still an element of not sure if it will work or not. And actually one of my current summer students, we kind of threw a horrible software package at her and just said, compare this to the current one and what happens. And she's having a lot of trouble with it. But the thing is, we're learning a lot from that. We're learning not to use this software package for a start. But she's also finding some other things that are wrong with the current software packages, and she's questioning what's happening in the literature. But we didn't quite know what the outcome would be. But so you have a smaller base project that then fits into the larger project that maybe a master's is doing over 2 years or a PhD is doing for 4 or 5. And then some of my summer students come back from 1 year to the next to carry on and build on what they've learned, which is always a nice sign. And so then the summer students would work more directly one-on-one in the normal non-COVID world in the lab with the master's student. And then the PhD student would have maybe the similar kind of concept, but they would maybe be talking to 3 or 4 master's students. And again, that goes up the level to the postdoc. And then I'm there kind of going, okay, where's all the data I need to write a grant to be able to pay all you and stuff. So I'm more of a manager in some respects. You're managing your research group. And occasionally you get in the lab and get to poke things and show that you still remember stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. Just kind of to see how when you work your way up the hierarchy, you have completely different obligations, or definitely have to change what you normally do. So we just want to give you the opportunity to give any last advice before we have a couple questions to ask.
Just general advice for academia. Look at your kind of soft skills, cross-disciplinary skills. So I mentioned earlier, the team putting this together, make sure this is on your CV, make sure you describe what you've done. So, you've got, I think, 21 participants. So you keep track of things like that, how many people you talk with, how many people are on your mailing list. Use these numbers. Try and quantify things to impress people. So with my company, we entered this program, and I think 170 kind of companies applied, 70 got interviewed, 26 got selected, and 10 finished, and we were one of the 10. So just by saying those numbers gives you a good story to tell, right? So if you say, hey, we organized an event like this and we attracted 200 people, if it was a grad event, something like that, and then we had multiple industry speakers, and there's ways to sell it, I guess is the way. Your CV is ultimately there to get you in front of somebody to talk to them, right? So make it interesting. In one of my job interviews, my first question was, so you like bungee jumping? Because I put that down as my hobby. And I've done 3 highest bungee jumps in the world, I think. But not since I had a kid. So, there's ways to try and differentiate your CV. So that kind of comes back to my previous comment about the kind of the GPA. If you just go, yes, you've got your degree in electronics and you've got a GPA of 4, that's nice. For a graduate student, I want to know if you can actually work in a different hard stress environment. So if you've done a hackathon and you've got deadlines and people and funding and you've got deliverables, all that kind of stuff. So anything like that that you can put onto your resume or your CV will help differentiate you. And that gets you to the conversation. And then you work from there. That's a different skill set. But so, a piece of advice I give to all my undergraduate students and even my graduate students, there's a lot of, or there are a great many resources available to undergraduate students at the university through the Career Center, through my grad skills and stuff. Use the things that you have available in your high school, and also through the CBE or through other organizations, not-for-profits and charities that will give you experience, will give you these other skills that you don't get from just going to school.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Are you okay if we send over a couple questions?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Great. So this one's kind of been asked a couple times, but people want to know what your favorite research project was and why.
My favorite research project. This one was one I did during my PhD, because it kind of really opened my eyes up to how electronics could be applied in the biomedical field. But basically, I was working with electric fields to manipulate pathogens in water. And the thing was, we could identify if the pathogen was kind of inactive or not. So if you drank the water and it was inactive, nobody cared, because it just went straight through you. So it opened my eyes to how water treatment plants work, and opened my eyes to how electronics, which you don't normally associate with kind of the biomedical fluid side of things and pathogen detection, was interesting. And I had some great people involved in that project. I was doing a lot of stuff up with the Scottish Parasite Diagnostics Laboratory. So I was going up to Scotland a lot from Wales. So the research enabled all of that. And it was a fun time when I started learning that I really liked research. So that probably is why I pick it. It's not the sexiest research out there. The BCI stuff is just kind of amazing where it can go. But that was my first real kind of, I really like this. I liked it when I learned something new and went to a conference in Germany and presented it, and I suddenly realized, hey, I'm the world expert on this. How'd that happen?
That's really fascinating. That's cool, and I'm sure you definitely learned a lot from that and gained a lot of experience as a researcher. So I think we'll end it with this next question. People want to know how they can reach out to you, or if you have like lab opportunities or research opportunities with high school students, and where they can find you or contact you.
Okay, so my contact information should have been circulated on the this document, but it's you can find me online if you look me up on the University of Calgary contacts. There's a couple of places where I'm on the university webpage. One of them is the Biomedical Engineering webpage, which currently says I'm not looking for students. The reason being is I get 5 to 10 emails a day just from students around the world wanting to do research in the group. And so I don't want to encourage anymore because I don't have the funding. At the moment, I've got my full complement of students. In terms of how high school students get involved, the person to ask would be Rihanna, because she did it. She was working partially in my lab before COVID hit. It's a lot of paperwork. It's the biggest issue with working with any kind of large organization, and the universities are, I think, particularly adept at making more bureaucracy than they need. So part of the problem with high school students on campus is what is known as liability with the insurance and the risk. And so when we do that, we have to basically go through a lot of processes with the HR department to get things done. I think various waivers and legal forms have to be signed. It's a pain in the butt, basically. But it has to be done on that respect. But other than that, if you contact myself or other professors, that's the first step. I mean, Rihanna did this out of the blue. We went through the paperwork. I think it took 4 months to get the paperwork done. I know, it was just nuts. So that's the way to do it. The other way of trying to do it is finding out if there's any specific programs the university is running in conjunction with potentially your school or with some kind of outreach program. And then you kind of bypass the paperwork by going through one of these programs. But at the moment offhand, I can't think of what they are. Potentially your school careers people would have connections to the university's careers people, and they could work on that. So yeah, unfortunately, it has to be more of a one-on-one individual thing, and then there's just the bureaucracy, which tends to put people off. There's a lot of it, sadly. But if anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to email me. That's not a problem.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that's the gist of it. We're so grateful to have you here today. You answered a lot of our questions, and I think we all have a better understanding of kind of research opportunities and the researching world. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, we thank you for your time, and I'm sure everyone appreciated everything you said. So thank you for joining us.
No problem. Well, thank you for inviting me, and hopefully see some of you at the UFC in a few years.
Thank you to everyone who came today.
Okay. Bye now.